You know, when we walk down the street, we have this really profound, unspoken trust in the concrete under our feet.
Yeah, we really do.
Like, we assume that the world we see, the world we touch, the bank accounts we log into, the borders drawn on our maps, we just assume they are rock-solid, objective reality. It's comforting, you know, we don't really question it.
Right, it is comforting. I mean, we inherently crave that solidity. We want to believe the rules of the game we are playing every single day were handed down by the universe itself, like gravity or thermodynamics.
Exactly. But then you encounter a framework that just takes a complete sledgehammer to that concrete. So, welcome to today's deep dive. We have a really fascinating mission today.
We do.
We are unpacking a highly provocative university lecture transcript. It's a course introduction titled Secret History Number 1, How Power Works. And let me tell you, this is not your standard syllabus overview.
Not at all.
We're looking at an argument that almost everything you think you know, like history, economics, psychology, even the fundamental concept of who you are, is a carefully constructed illusion.
It's a massive paradigm shift. And to truly grasp the overarching mission here, we actually have to start where this material starts, which is with the 18th century philosopher Immanuel Kant.
Okay, Kant. Let's get into it.
Right, so this entire worldview rests on a Kantian foundation. Kant argued something really radical for his time, which is that human beings can never actually know true objective reality. He called that unvarnished, unfiltered reality the noumena, like the things in themselves.
Right. So the noumena is the reality behind the curtain, the stuff we can't actually touch directly.
We can never access the noumena because our senses, our very human perception, they warp that reality the literal moment we encounter it.
Because of our brains.
Yeah, we have to filter the universe through our brains, organizing it with hardwired concepts like time, space, causality, just to be able to process it without our minds breaking. And Kant called this filtered, processed version of reality the phenomena.
The phenomena.
Right. It's the world as it appears to us, not as it actually is. So the foundational argument we're exploring today is that reality is fundamentally what we imagine it to be.
Okay, think of it like wearing a permanent virtual reality headset from the exact moment you were born.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
You look around and you see this incredibly detailed, high-resolution software interface. You see trees, buildings, dollar bills, national borders, and it all feels perfectly real.
Very real.
But you never, ever see the underlying code making it run. So the noumena is that underlying code, and the phenomena is the VR game we're all playing. And the core argument here is that we completely forget we're wearing the headset.
That is a brilliant analogy. We completely forget the headset is there.
Yeah.
And the mission of this entire framework is to teach us how to finally see the headset. By studying geopolitics, history, and economics through this Kantian lens, we can begin to see how power actually functions in the real world.
Right.
Power isn't just tanks and guns. Power is the ability to manipulate our collective imagination. It's the ability to write the code for the VR headset.
Wow.
And the ultimate goal of understanding this isn't just to be, a detached academic. It's true liberation. It's about understanding exactly how your perception is being manipulated so you can finally step outside of it.
So if reality is just an agreed-upon imagination, a shared software interface, we have to immediately target the most universally accepted illusion of all, the one we, stress about, fight over, and quite literally dedicate our entire waking lives to acquiring money.
Right. Money. And to dismantle the illusion of money, the lecture says we have to look back at the actual historical mechanics of banking. It started centuries ago with merchants trading physical gold. Now, carrying heavy chests of gold across continents was dangerous. You could be robbed. It was heavy. It was inconvenient.
Yeah, definitely not ideal for travel.
Exactly. So merchants began depositing their physical gold with early banks for safekeeping. In return, the bank would issue a paper receipt, which was essentially a contract promising to return that exact amount of gold to the bearer on demand.
Which makes perfect logistical sense. I mean, it is infinitely easier to travel across Europe with a piece of paper in your pocket than 100 pounds of metal.
It does. But then, the early bankers realized something that fundamentally changed human history. Other merchants would come to them needing loans to fund expeditions.
Right.
And the bankers figured out they didn't actually need to hand over physical gold from the vault for these loans. They could just write out more paper receipts.
Wait, just write more receipts than they had gold.
Precisely. Let's say a bank had $5 million in gold sitting in the vault. They realized they could issue another $5 million in paper receipts as loans to new merchants, charging interest on it. Suddenly, the bank has mathematically doubled the money supply.
Unbelievable.
They created value out of absolutely nothing. The lecture describes this as pure alchemy.
And what's wild is this isn't just ancient history. We see this exact alchemy functioning on a massive scale today. I mean, look at the staggering infrastructure boom in China over the last 20 years.
Yes, perfect example.
You have entire megacities, high-speed rail networks, and skyscrapers appearing practically overnight. Banks like the Bank of China became some of the largest financial institutions on the planet. And this didn't happen because Chinese citizens suddenly got incredibly wealthy and deposited trillions of physical dollars into savings accounts.
No, not at all.
It happened because the central banking system simply printed that money into existence on a digital ledger to finance the concrete and steel.
Exactly. They spoke the money into existence through lending. The ledger simply expanded.
Okay, let's unpack this, because if I'm putting myself in the shoes of someone hearing this for the first time, my mental alarms are going off. Like, I'm waving a massive red flag here.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Because we are explicitly taught from day one that resources are finite. The classic economic analogy we all learn is the limited pie. There's only so much pie to go around.
Right.
So I have to push back here. Even if the ledger is infinite, the physical world isn't. What about a massive drought? What about global supply chain failures where microchips physically cannot be built fast enough? You can't print wheat on a bank ledger. So if banks can literally perform alchemy, how does this framework account for actual physical scarcity? Why does grinding poverty still exist?
That is the exact friction point this logic forces us to confront. It's the natural pushback. But the explanation is incredibly cynical, yet internally consistent. The argument dismantles the limited pie analogy by separating baseline physical resources from systemic economic poverty.
Okay, how so?
Yes, a localized drought is a physical reality. But global poverty, that is entirely different. Money is just a number on a ledger. Therefore, systemic poverty is not an accident of nature. It is not a natural, unavoidable result of physical scarcity. Poverty is a deliberate, engineered tool created by the architects of the system.
A tool? Engineered to do what?
To force you to work. Think about the mechanics of labor. If everyone had infinite money, like if the ledger was just opened up for everyone, no one would voluntarily pour hot asphalt for roads, farm the fields in the freezing rain, or scrub hospital floors.
Yeah, that's true.
The system requires labor to function. Therefore, artificial misery must be maintained. You have to create the illusion that money is incredibly scarce and valuable. You need a permanent underclass. You need to see people suffering in poverty so that you and everyone else will wake up every single morning and work tirelessly to avoid becoming one of them.
Man, that is a remarkably dark way to look at the economy. But it frames things like economic crises and wars in a completely different light. Like, stock market crashes aren't unfortunate accidents or market corrections.
Nope.
And wars aren't actually fought over scarce resources. They are deliberate release valves. They are mechanisms designed to destroy excess wealth.
Exactly.
If there's too much money floating around in the middle class, people might get comfortable, they might stop grinding. So the system occasionally has to blow up the economy to reset the scarcity illusion and get everyone back on the hamster wheel.
You have to continually reinforce the idea that the numbers on the ledger represent life and death.
The analogy used to explain this completely clicked for me. Think about the video game World of Warcraft, or really any massive multiplayer online game.
Oh yeah, the WoW analogy.
In those games, players will literally grind for hours doing incredibly repetitive, pointless tasks just to earn digital gold coins so they can buy a glowing digital sword. But if the game developers got generous and suddenly made digital gold rain from the sky for free, the entire game's economy would instantly collapse.
Right, there'd be no point.
Nobody would bother doing the quests. Nobody would play the game anymore. We are looking at an argument that our real-world economy is exactly the same mechanism. We are just grinding for digital credits, and the scarcity is entirely programmed into the software.
And when you challenge this with the physical realities, saying, well, food isn't a digital credit, food is literally a finite physical object, we have to look at the physical evidence. Look at the staggering scale of the garbage dumps in Beijing or New York or London.
Oh, the food waste is insane.
Look at the millions of tons of perfectly good food destroyed by grocery stores and restaurants every single day. Food isn't infinitely abundant, but mathematically, logistically, we already produce more than enough to comfortably feed every single human being on Earth.
So the hunger is...
Hunger, much like financial poverty, is an artificial crisis. It's a distribution problem designed to maintain leverage.
So if the system requires you to grind endlessly for these artificial credits, it can't afford for you to rely on a strong community. Because a deeply connected community shares resources, they cover each other's blind spots, and eventually they might just stop playing the game altogether.
Precisely.
To keep the economic engine running, you have to be isolated. Which brings us to the next massive target here. The very concept of the individual that we are all working so hard to protect.
This is a crucial pivot. We have to examine the invention of the self and the incredible burden of personal agency. We take it for granted, but the concept of the individual as we understand it today, completely independent, atomized, separate from family or extended community, is a shockingly recent modern invention.
Let's ground this. Imagine you were listening to this right now and you check your phone and realize you just won a massive lottery jackpot. $50 million. What is your immediate instinct? You'd probably call a financial advisor, buy a house for yourself, set up some mutual funds, and secure your own permanent financial independence. You'd build a fortress around your individual self.
Right, that's the modern reflex.
But what would our ancient ancestors do if they stumbled upon the equivalent wealth, say, a massive, unexplainable pile of gold or resources?
The historical record shows they wouldn't bury it in the woods for themselves. They would immediately throw a massive days-long feast for their entire village.
Really?
Yeah. In ancient human history, individual happiness was entirely indistinguishable from collective happiness. The ancient Greeks had a word for this, eudaimonia, which translates roughly to human flourishing.
Eudaimonia. Okay.
Your standing, your reputation within the community, your generosity, that was the only currency that actually mattered. The ultimate proof of this is how ancients handled crime. The ultimate punishment wasn't the death penalty, it was exile. Banishment.
Because being pushed out of the group was a death sentence anyway. You were just a severed limb.
Precisely. Without the group, you couldn't survive physically, but more importantly, you ceased to exist psychologically. Your identity was entirely woven into the collective fabric. But today, we live in self-imposed exile. We isolate ourselves in individual apartments with individual bank accounts, staring at individual screens.
That's so true.
And this isolation isn't an accident.
Yeah.
It is deliberately cultivated by the mechanics of power. What's fascinating here is the contrast between two very distinct worldviews and how a shift in human thought allowed this isolation to take root. Think about ancient polytheism, societies with multiple gods.
Okay.
In that system, the gods were unpredictable, petty, vengeful, and constantly messing with human affairs. You had absolutely no real control over your fate. If your crops failed, it was because the rain god was angry. If you got rich, a different god might strike you down out of sheer jealousy.
So since you had no control, you might as well live it up today, show what you have, and throw a feast.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because the gods were the ultimate source of your misfortune, it paradoxically allowed humans to bond together. It created a shared victimhood. It fostered deep collective action against external hardships.
That makes a lot of sense.
Now, fast forward and contrast that with the modern paradigm. The dominant religion of today is science, specifically things like neuroscience and modern psychology. Science tells us that we are just a biological machine, a collection of synapses and DNA. It tells us we have total autonomous agency over our actions.
Right.
If you are angry or depressed or failing in life, it's not an angry God. It's a chemical imbalance in your personal brain. It is your individual responsibility to fix it.
And power vastly prefers this scientific hyper-individualized model because it completely isolates the threat of the populace. Think about the mechanics of it. If you believe you are 100% responsible for your own misery, your own poverty, your own sadness, you will never blame the overarching system.
You won't.
You can't engage in collective action or rebellion because you view the problem as entirely internal. You are broken, not the world.
The behavioral consequence of this is a society of people who feel entirely powerless, overwhelmed by the burden of their own agency. Instead of organizing or relying on community, people retreat into individual escapism. We self-medicate with endless video games, binge-watching, or pornography. And crucially, this internalization of blame makes you entirely dependent on modern authority figures to fix you.
The critique of modern psychiatry here is incredibly sharp. The argument suggests that if someone in the ancient world felt despair, they would rely on their village. Today, society trains you to go to an institutional psychiatrist.
Right.
And the premise we are exploring, and again, we are just looking at the mechanics of this argument, impartially, it claims that the psychiatric system isn't structurally designed to cure you and send you back to your community. It is designed to diagnose your individual brokenness, prescribe you pharmaceuticals, and keep you tethered to institutional authority.
The overarching theme binding all of this together is dependence. Power requires your absolute dependence, but that raises a massive logistical question. If the concept of the isolated individual is a trap and the scarcity of money is a mathematical lie, how on earth do you get billions of human beings to willingly buy into these grand illusions generation after generation without a massive violent revolt?
Here's where it gets really interesting, because you can't just enforce this with police or the military. That's way too expensive and unstable. To maintain this level of compliance, you need a psychological brainwashing factory. And that factory, according to this framework, is the modern education system.
Yes. We have to completely discard the romantic notion that school is about acquiring knowledge, nurturing curiosity, or bettering oneself. The lecture posits that mandatory schooling is an institution engineered purely for behavioral indoctrination.
Let's look at how humans learn for the vast, vast majority of our history. It was apprenticeship. If you wanted to be a healer or a doctor 1,000 years ago, you didn't sit at a desk in a lecture hall for 12 years taking standardized tests.
Definitely not.
You found a working doctor. You started by washing the blood off the clinic floors. You observed. You slowly started mixing herbs. You learned reality through direct physical feedback. Apprenticeship fosters independence because you see the direct results of your actions in the real world.
Exactly.
But modern school replaces reality with an artificial hierarchy. It sits kids in rows, makes them respond to a factory bell, and labels some smart and others stupid purely to categorize them for the labor force.
The job training aspect is secondary, though. The primary essential function of school goes much deeper into human psychology. It's about fundamental behavioral conditioning.
Think about this for a second. If school is genuinely just a place to efficiently transfer facts into a human brain, why don't you and your kids go to school together? Why is the absolute separation of parent and child the mandatory first step of the educational process?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, to the mechanics of psychology, the reasoning is actually quite chilling. It comes down to attachment theory. To successfully brainwash or indoctrinate a human being, you first have to break their secure attachments. You have to take a vulnerable 5-year-old child and physically separate them from the protective, unconditional love of their family unit.
Which, biologically speaking, is a deeply traumatic event for a primate.
It is. It creates profound existential anxiety and insecurity in the child. And in that heightened state of fear and abandonment, the child's brain scrambles for a new authority figure to restore a sense of safety. They inevitably transfer their trust and dependence to the teacher at the front of the room.
Wow.
And by extension, they are transferring their deepest psychological trust to the state. If the parent were sitting right there in the classroom, the child wouldn't blindly accept what was being taught. They would just turn around and ask, "Mom, is this teacher telling the truth?"
You fundamentally cannot indoctrinate a child who feels entirely safe and protected by their community. And what exactly is the state injecting into that vulnerable space? We can look at the historical origins of mandatory free public schooling to find out. It wasn't invented by enlightened progressive democracies looking to uplift the minds of the peasant class. If we look at the 3 earliest adopters of mandatory state schooling, we find Sparta, the Aztec Empire, and 19th century Prussia.
And what did Sparta, the Aztecs, and Prussia all have in common? They were hyper-aggressive, relentlessly war-making societies. When Prussia designed the modern classroom with its rigid rows, its strict adherence to the clock, its absolute obedience to the teacher, they weren't trying to create independent, critical thinkers. They had just lost a major war. They needed obedient, compliant soldiers who would follow orders without questioning the logic.
The ultimate goal of this institutional conditioning is to implant a completely false synthetic memory into your brain. The concept of the nation-state. We are taught standardized history and geography for a very specific reason. It's to manufacture a feeling of deep, mystical kinship with millions of strangers you will never meet and who you have absolutely nothing in common with.
Right.
The goal is to make you believe in an invisible, artificial construct like Mother Russia, the motherland, or any other national identity. You have to believe in the VR headset so deeply that when the system demands it, you will willingly pick up a rifle and go die on a muddy battlefield to protect lines drawn on a map by someone else. It is the ultimate triumph of obedience over self-preservation.
It is a sweeping, radical deconstruction of every pillar of modern life. And as we pull all these threads together, we arrive at a grand synthesis. Infinite money on a ledger, the concept of the totally isolated individual, and the borders of the nation-state. According to this framework, absolutely none of these are natural phenomena. They are all expressions of that alchemy we discussed at the very beginning, the terrifying power to turn nothing into everything, just by manipulating the human imagination.
And there is a specific historical catalyst that made this specific brand of alchemy possible. Like, how did we go from messy, localized communities to these massive, centralized illusions? The argument traces the root cause back to a massive revolution in human psychology, the birth of monotheism.
This is the underlying mechanism that bridges everything. Think about the psychological rewiring required to move from polytheism to monotheism. When humanity shifted from believing in many chaotic, localized spirits to believing in one single, omnipotent, centralized God, it fundamentally changed how the human brain processes reality. A single God establishes the concept of a single, absolute, centralized truth.
Which primes the brain for centralized power.
Precisely. Once the human mind is conditioned to accept a single, invisible, all-powerful authority in the spiritual realm, it becomes incredibly easy to copy and paste that architecture into the physical realm.
Oh, I see.
The idea of one God smoothly morphs into the acceptance of one absolute state authority. It morphs into the acceptance of one centralized banking ledger dictating the value of human labor. Monotheism trained humanity to look up to a single, unquestionable source for the rules of the game. Power simply stepped into that centralized architecture.
That's fascinating.
Power isn't just physical force. It is the capacity to make you believe that the paper receipt is objectively valuable, that you are entirely alone in your struggles, and that the invisible borders on a map are sacred enough to die for.
So what does this all mean? The emotional weight of this analysis is incredibly heavy. It argues that this grand, interconnected system of alchemy is currently making humanity miserable. We are exhausted, working endlessly for artificial game credits, feeling totally isolated in our personal failures, and pledging our deepest allegiances to phantom nations.
Yeah, it paints a bleak picture initially.
But, and this is a massive but, there is an incredible silver lining hidden inside all of this. Because none of this is objective reality. Because it is all just the phenomena of the software of the VR headset. Well, it means it was entirely an accident of human imagination. We made it all up.
Which means, quite simply, it can be unmade. If reality is truly what we collectively imagine it to be, then by understanding exactly how power manipulates our imagination, we strip them of that power. We reclaim the capacity to imagine something else entirely.
Which brings us all the way back to that concrete sidewalk we talked about at the very beginning of this deep dive. It feels so solid, so permanent, until you realize that someone else poured the cement and it can always be torn up. I want to leave you with a thought to mull over as you go about your day, something to really explore on your own. If the scarcity of your money, the isolation you feel as an individual, and the borders of the nation you live in are all just accidental constructs built by someone else's imagination thousands of years ago, what kind of reality would you choose to build if you finally realized you were the one holding the pen?
It completely shatters how you look at the world around you.
It really does. It changes everything. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the architecture of power. We'll see you next time.